Hello there, I'm Bob Plankers. I'm a staff technical marketing architect at VMware Corporation, and it's my pleasure to be invited to talk with you about one of my favorite topics. You've probably heard me talk before about security and compliance things with vSphere and virtual infrastructure, things like that. And this is one of those semi-live sorts of talks. It's a recorded talk, but I'm out in the chat. If you want to say hi or tell me off, tell me a joke. I like pirate jokes and things like that. But yeah, if you've got questions or whatever, put them out in the chat. And I've probably already said something out there, but if not, I'll be along. And yeah, no, but appreciate you coming. A little different of a talk with when it comes to information security. It's the you want me to do what exactly sort of talk. The talk I had with my boss a number of years ago. The where my boss walked up to me and said, "Hey, we need you to work on this compliance thing," and I was like, "Hey, not it. I don't do security stuff. I'm just a lowly sysadmin around here, and I just work here, pal. And turns out he wasn't really asking, and yeah, so yeah, well, okay, so sysadmin's my world. I've always been up for a little bit of a challenge, something different. But you go down this journey, and how did I get here? Like this is little old me down in the corner here hiking this trail or whatever. There's some cattle along the side. It looks like some very nice territory here. But what along this journey, I start looking for things we find growing along the side of the road. So growing along the side of the road, NIST 800-53. Well, the compliance thing that I needed to work on at the time was related to, I was at a tier 1 university and research university and biological research. We needed to secure some of that research and provide a secure environment to store it and do some of those things. And so subject to NIST 800-53. In fact, 800-53 R4. That's not the photo here, but same difference. And, so fire that up and I start reading and I'm like, what is this junk? Who writes this stuff? Yuck, PCI DSS was also on the list of things. And, hey, we need to build an environment to support taking credit cards. And, what? No. What? No way. And yeah, so I'm reading this stuff. PCI DSS, a little bit more concrete than the NIST security standards or whatever, but still a little out there. And and so other resources that I knew about. So these things, it's interesting. And one of the first realizations I made with these regulatory frameworks is that they tell you what you need to accomplish, but they don't tell you how. So you look around so how do I do this stuff? Does somebody else have this? Well, I found the vSphere Security Configuration Guide, written by my my predecessor, Mike Foley. And at the time, little did I know I would end up curating it. And in fact, we just released a new version of it for vSphere 8 at least. And yeah, so looking at this stuff, that's great. There's a lot of guidance there about security. And I also didn't realize at the time that security and compliance are like cousins. They're not actually, security is not compliance. Well, security can contribute positively to compliance, but compliance is not security. Compliance is a business process, right? It's a gatekeeping exercise so that an industry will only let you participate in it if you meet certain requirements. You can only run a nuclear power plant if you meet the requirements of NERC-CIP, for example. And you can only take credit cards if you meet PCI DSS. Or you convince an auditor, a third-party auditor, that you meet the requirements. And that's actually a subtle difference, something you learn on this journey. And yeah. But so the SCG, the Security Configuration Guide, the DISA-STIGs, all that stuff, those are implementation guides. They tell you what to do, but they don't tell you why, and they certainly don't. There's not a mapping between these things. They're just all kind of floating out there in space. And then on top of it, my compliance folks, in infosec, show up with this, list of things from a compliance scanner. I think theirs was Qualys at the time. This is a picture of Carbon Black. I just have a picture of a tool that helps you figure out what the state of your environment is. But and it's Carbon Black's got the stuff in it, Qualys, Rapid7. There's all these things, but it turns out there's somebody's opinion. You look at the stuff, and it looks strikingly like the security configuration guide, except turned up a notch. So, I go back to my boss, and I'm like, this is crazy. I really want to say not it, and he's like, no, you're stuck with it. You're the right guy for this. And I'm like, fine, and I asked him, why isn't the infosec group doing this stuff? And I know I was actually lucky to have infosec people. There's a lot of organizations that aren't large enough to have infosec people, and so straight up, the role of vSphere admins in information security in a small organization is vSphere admins, sysadmins. They do everything, right? But in larger organizations, what is infosec doing versus what do the sysadmins do? Well, infosec is busy writing policy to start with. How do you know if you've met a goal organizationally if you don't write that goal down, if you don't agree on what the goal is, and so writing that policy down, infosec does that, and they're the right people to do that, but it does take time. Incident response, threat hunting sucks up a lot of infosec time. People who click on the darndest things, those URLs that all training, security training for corporations say that you don't click on URLs in email, and then the next thing you do, your coworker puts a URL in an email, and you click on it because that it's easy, right? I do it too. But eventually somebody will click on something dumb. Their desktop will be hacked. That and they got to figure that stuff out. Finding attackers running around in your network, that takes time. So security analysts spend a lot of time doing that stuff. Spend a lot of time doing audits, actually seeing if the organization meets the policies that they've written down. And that's important as well. So the other big reason why infosec doesn't do a lot of this work and starts to speak to why sysadmins are important, vSphere admins are important in this whole mess, is that infosec doesn't really know anything about vSphere. And it's not their job. This is not a dig on infosec folks. I love infosec folks. They can be some of the most interesting humans you'll ever meet. And, well, probably mostly human. And but they don't know vSphere. It's not their job to know vSphere. You know whose job it is? Yours, mine. And that's where we bring value here. What's missing in this slide is the thing that who does this stuff? Where's the between policy and audits? There's a missing piece there, and that's vSphere admins. That the actual implementation, the operational side of security is sysadmins. And that's why sysadmins, vSphere admins, cloud admins are so very important in this. And security cannot be ignored in your jobs anymore. And I used to tell my guys at the UW-Madison is where I was for 23 years. And I used to tell my team, great folks that worked with me there. I used to tell my team this stuff is is happening. We can either be done with us or it can be done to us, and I would urge you to think about having it done with you, and control it. And so, because you bring something to the table, you really do, you bring the ability to take NIST 800-53 and actually map it into a vSphere environment, an actual implementation that has tremendous value to your organization. They may not realize it. They may take you for granted, at which point, we'll talk about that, how to avoid being taken for granted. That's sort of the back half of my talk here, like what do we do about our newfound security glory here? How do we turn it into glory? But, doing this mapping is really important, taking these requirements and actually turning them into something actionable that exists and runs and that doesn't drive you nuts. That's actually a really interesting thing too. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes when I get to the asking questions part. The other thing too is, these implementation guides. So a lot of folks sort of attack the compliance requirements with implementation guides. The security configuration guide, CIS benchmarks are a popular thing as well, and but there's somebody's opinion. The security configuration guide is, I curate it. It's collective opinions, but it's still somebody's opinion. CIS benchmark is the opinion of the Center for Internet Security, for example. That stuff is enshrined in the compliance scanners of the world, the Qualisuses and Rapid7s and all that stuff. What they put in there and they're testing for, somebody's opinion. And so how do you sort that out? And how do you sort it out in ways, and not everything in these things needs to happen in your organization. Context is really important in security. And so some of these ideas are going to be detrimental to your business. How do you map your business needs? How do you map these security ideas to your business needs and then explain it? I should actually reverse the one arrow here back. How do you explain it back to an auditor? How you did all that stuff, Sysadmins, it kind of pains me to use a Gartner slide, but I'm gonna here because I think it illustrates the role of sysadmins really well. In fact, this is sort of the Maslow's hierarchy of information security needs, as it were, and which kind of makes me laugh. And then let's look at it. The fundamental at the bottom: hardening, configuration, vulnerability management. Whose problem is that? It's ours. Network firewalling, visibility, microsegmentation. Probably ours to some point. Maybe maybe you're big enough to have an enterprise firewall admin or something like that. But telling the admin what you need, working with them, that's your problem. It's my problem. System integrity assurance, our problem. Application control, explicit allow, our problem. And that's the thing. vSphere admins are sort of at the nexus of a bunch of different organizational components. I liken vSphere admins, virtualization admins, to dishwashers in many ways. Dishwashers are the nexus of sewer, water, and electricity, and cabinetry and all kinds of other stuff. And it's kind of funny, we're kind of like the dishwashers of the IT world. We sit between the network, we sit between the storage, we sit between the application admins, all this stuff, and that's a very powerful position, especially when you start becoming security minded. But exploit prevention, memory protection, EDR. Who puts the EDR agents on workloads and maintains them? We do, all that stuff. This is all our problem. Somebody might be monitoring it to make sure that it happens. It happens according to policy and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's us that have to deal with all this stuff. And so that leads to step number one in my. So what do we get out of it? This is the thing. The expanded role. We have this expanded role whether we wanted it or not. We are an integral part of security, and then by proxy compliance. So we're an integral part of security in our organizations, information security in our organizations. So let's get that written down into our position descriptions. Let's actually have somebody write it down so that we get credit for it. And this way too, if it's part of your PD, if it's part of your job description, and you've got organizational goals, you've got OKRs or whatever you use, I hope you've got some organizational goals. And if you don't, you might want to have some, even if your boss doesn't care that much, you might want to have some to demonstrate, some what you're working on, some progress. And make security and compliance. And good security will lead to good compliance, especially if you take the time to explain to an auditor. Auditors also don't know. In fact, it was an auditor that clued me into the fact that they don't know anything about vSphere. Like they're just using a spreadsheet. And I quote, "I'm using a spreadsheet that I found on my file share back at the office, to audit vSphere." And I'm like, "But a bunch of this is wrong." I told the guy, and he's like, "So let's fix it." And I'm like, and I'm here now. This is how this happened. But, yeah, get credit for it. Put it in your PD. The other thing, too, along the lines of the dishwashers of the IT world, we're the nexus of all of these. I think nexus is a better description. It sounds cooler, at least, than the dishwasher crew. But the Dishwashers are very important, but the work to see the bigger picture. You sit in the middle of all of this stuff. Open your eyes, and look at the bigger picture. And one of the best ways you can do that from an information security perspective is to use the CIA triad. The CIA triad is the three core tenets of information security. Depending on who you ask, there's also core tenets that there's a Hexerian, the Parkerian hexad, and the Hexerian Parkad. No, the other way around. Parkerian hexad, which is 6 different things. Let's go with CIA triad. Sounds cooler anyhow. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality, the idea that you want to keep your data out of unauthorized people's hands. That's what you think about when you think about security, right? But it's only a third of the equation. It's important, but it's a third of the equation. Integrity is a real important part. And, and integrity fits right in with system administration stuff. How do you guarantee that your environment, especially like Bitrot, it's not even a security thing per se. It's something you don't even think about from a security standpoint, but picking a RAID level or erasure coding or whatever on a storage array, so that you don't lose data. That's an integrity thing. And, you do that stuff. And you don't even associate it with security, but it absolutely is. And, the idea that you want your data, when it's stored somewhere, you want to come back to it and find it in the condition you expect it to be in, I had a drive die late last year at this point on my desktop here, and it did so by corrupting, before it died outright, it corrupted a bunch of my data. It was not authorized to corrupt my data. And then I had to test my backup systems, which thankfully worked pretty well, in fact. But, who does that on an enterprise level? Sysadmins, it's important. Availability. Why even have these systems if they're not available, right? And so building availability in, building the failover in, the ability to vMotion things around, working out with the app teams that vMotion is going to happen, come on, let us do it, that sort of thing, patching, all that stuff. That's sysadmin stuff, and that's really important. Availability actually directly influences confidentiality and integrity too, especially with vulnerabilities. The ability to use the availability features in vSphere to patch a confidentiality problem is huge. And in that light, you can take pretty much any feature in vSphere and map it into one or more of these. And this is not a complete list of vSphere features by any means, but you get my point, right? You can justify anything you want to do in vSphere from a security perspective. And I'm not saying be manipulative, but hey, if use it to your advantage. Like what I want to improve security by actually enforcing a policy that says we will vMotion VMs regardless of what app admins say. Like that's a security thing. I want to improve security by doing that. Well, who's going to argue? It's tough to argue against security. In this day and age, security is paramount. Well, you can go overboard with it, but you get my point. Use it to your advantage. These are things that can help you achieve your goals, and to sound authoritative about it as well. The other thing too, you're sitting at this nexus. You're the dishwasher of everything. You're sitting at this nexus. You can also keep an eye on, some of these ideas. Turning security to 11, as the movie quote goes. It will inconvenience inconvenience you, will impede work, all that stuff. And so finding the right balance, and believe it or not, sometimes compliance frameworks can actually help with this balance too. And but this is now your job. This is something you should be thinking about. What is that right balance between security and the ability to use your systems? I had a chief operating officer once that would often tell me to remind the security guys that we paid for these systems to use them. And that seems a little harsh, but it's true. He was getting to the tension there between lock it all down and keep it all open. The usability is often the first victim of security. And so what's the balance there? Especially considering anything that you can use, your attackers will use as well. So that's tough. As you do this, you'll start being able to help your teams prioritize and work ahead. Even if you're not the leader of the team, You can foreshadow, just like I do with my kids when it's time to leave a place or whatever, or time to wrap it up. Wrap the iPads up or whatever. Like, hey, you got 5 minutes. You can sort of foreshadow this stuff with your own teams too. Hey, I've been working on this compliance stuff, and it looks like we're going to need to change the way we build servers a little bit. Like I don't have the complete list yet, but we'll talk about it maybe next week. But keep in mind, if there's some opportunities here, if we're doing any changing, it's just I want to talk to you about it. That's something you could just tell your team, like, and just foreshadow it a little bit, so it's not a surprise. People don't deal with change very well anywhere, but IT too. IT, we joined IT to avoid people and to avoid these things. These computers, we can control them, all that stuff, and turns out it's a falsehood. Like, it's all about people and process. But being able to look ahead at the rocky road in front of you and your team and help guide them, even, like I said, even if you're not the team lead or the manager or whatever, you can play an important role in this and help advise how do you get from point A to point B. This is obviously a Photoshop thing here, but the idea that this guy in business attire standing on this rock where he's not sliding off somehow, you need to get across this mountain. How do you do that in a safe way? Well, asking questions is a good way to do it as well. Good way, and the way I learned a lot of stuff. It turns out you can actually talk to your auditors. They're human beings. They like pirate jokes too. And I learned a lot from my auditors once I got over. I was initially given some really bad advice by a senior sysadmin, and don't ever talk to auditors. Don't volunteer anything. Don't just answer their questions with a minimum amount of information that gets them to go away. Okay, turns out auditors can be your friends too, and you can be a little manipulative. You can actually feed them some stuff if you want to see stuff changed, and it fits with things, But I'm not saying do that, but it's an option. But you can ask them questions. I asked him once, our PCI DSS guy. I'm like, I don't want to change service accounts. Changing service account passwords is error prone, full of human error. We got to reset a bunch of stuff. We get backup systems that aren't working right afterwards, and other systems. Is there any way I can avoid changing it every 90 days, as PCI DSS 321 says? And requirement 8.2.4, tells you how far I've come here, and that I can cite this crap. And the guy looked at me. He's like, "Well, how frequently would you like to change it?" And I said, "How about a year?" And he looked in a table about brute force attacking of passwords and stuff like that. He's like, well, instead of 9 characters with this character set, you need 16 characters, 16 character passwords with this character set. I'm like, sold, done. And then we just wrote it down. He's like, if we just write it down in the rationale, we're good. And that's where I learned about compensating controls, for example, the idea that you can meet the goal in a different way. Same was true with idle timeouts. I made a smart remark once to one of my infosec guys. Like, every time you stop in my office, I get logged out, and I wish the idle timeout was different. And he's like, "What do you want it to be?" I'm like, "Oh, I get to choose." He's like, "Yeah, like, the point is just to have it, not like, and have it be reasonable, not be he's like, "It doesn't need to be a straitjacket." And I'm like, mind blown. So ask questions. Hey, where? One of my other favorite questions: where in the regulatory compliance standard does it say I have to do this? Do this exact thing. Because often it won't. And that where it's saying to set a technical control in vSphere came from somewhere else, and may not be valid even. Depending on the age of the guidance. So, leading from wherever you are, I've kind of alluded to this already, but really important, especially as you start taking ownership of this new role. You were thrust into it unwillingly, and maybe you've decided to heck with this and you're out. But for a lot of folks, it grows on people. Especially some domain expertise, security domain expertise is kind of helpful. It's kind of nice. You can talk to the infosec people, and they make sense to you, and you make sense to them, which is a really startling concept to many folks. And you will lead. You don't have to be the manager of a group. You don't have to be a team lead or a technical lead. You can lead from wherever you are. And You know, the foreshadowing I was talking about helps immensely. And then what I also mentioned too, you know, remembering it's all a people problem. That, you know, it's not, we got into infosec because we wanted to be free of people perhaps, but you know, it's all about people and process. And because we sit in the middle, vSphere admins sit in the middle of everything. The Our involvement in the people and process, we can't shy away from it. And so we just have to own it. We have to accept it. And again, it can be done with you or to you. So do it with, you know, with, not to. With is the choice. And then last on my list here, advertise your work. Kind of goes back to my mention of OKRs and having it part of your position description. Make people aware of the stuff that you're doing. You know, like, hey, we just passed this audit and it was huge and a lot of work, and then spread the good news around. You know, like, hey, I have to thank a lot of folks, especially, you know, Larry and Mo really helped with getting the Windows stuff figured out or whatever, and Curly over there basically figured out, you know, helped me with all of the vSphere stuff and getting all that stuff, and it was really a team effort and great, you know. But make people aware of what you're doing. No news is good news is really a prevalent thing in IT, and it's terrible, you know. And people only associate us with negative events. We only show up when everything's broken, you know, and that isn't conducive to good things career wise. So, you know, get out there, fly the flag a little bit. So at any rate, I am done talking here. I hope that there's some ideas here that you can take back and use. You can certainly reach out to me. Like I said, I've walked this path, and I hope some of these tidbits that I've learned along the way here can be of help to you as well. But I really encourage you to embrace this stuff. You know, the world needs more sysadmin infosec practitioners, operational IT operations practitioners of security are really important. And so I'm hoping that you choose that route. So thanks for supporting VMUG, and I hope you have a terrific day. Take care.